The call of the Hogs can be heard all the way to San Francisco.
You're listening to Pod at the Palace with Curtis Wilkerson on Inside Arkansas.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday, and welcome back to the Pod at the Palace. I'm your host, Curtis Wilkerson with Inside Arkansas, and today's episode is presented by Razorback Apparel. Just go to razorback.com and use code HOGSBY20 for 20% off your first purchase today. Welcome to the weekend once again. I hope that that everybody's got some big plans to enjoy the weekend. The last one before we have, I'm going to say Razorback athletics, but fall camp starting up. We'll have some stuff to talk about on the weekends moving forward. That's for sure. I have big plans, a little bit of housekeeping here to lead the show. Unless something very cool or notable happens, probably not going to have a Pod at the Palace this weekend, or at least on Saturday. I'm going to be in baby classes. Yeah, that's right. Nobody told me I have to go to school to become a father. You know what I mean? Like, I've been prepping my entire life for this, man. I'm ready. What are we talking about here? What happened to paternal instinct kicking in? What's going on? They're going to teach us how to breathe? I know how to breathe. I knew how to breathe when I came out of the womb, right? Like, we don't even have to teach the baby that. I don't understand what we're doing here. This is crazy. I'm kidding. Obviously, I'm kidding. But seriously, it's kind of an all-day event for us on Saturday. We're going to learn some things, get a little bit more prepared and more comfortable as we get, closer and closer and closer to welcome in the little man into the world here. We're getting excited. So that's what I'm going to be doing on Saturday. I'll be out of pocket, barring big news. Sunday for the show remains to be determined. We'll see what's going on. But just be on the lookout for that. Didn't want to catch anybody by surprise. But we do have a fun show lined up for you here today. I'm going to pose a question that I think might rub Razorback fans the wrong way, even though I think we're all on the same page when it comes to the answer when it's all said and done there. Hey, today's episode of the Pod at the Palace is also presented by our friends over at Basis Health. We know they're changing the way healthcare is provided with those mobile medical visits. If you're feeling down, feeling crummy, you got a fever, you're throwing up all over the place, do you really want to get in the car, drive across town, go to a doctor's office, sit in a waiting room with a bunch of other sick people? Probably not. Why don't you have them come to you? That's exactly what Basis Health can do with those mobile medical visits. They'll send a physician out to you for primary care, urgent care, IV hydration, and much, much more. Check them out today, www.basishealth.org, or scan that QR code in the top right-hand corner of your screen for more information. Okay, where to start today? Did you guys remember the 3 R's growing up? There's multiple versions of that. Recycle, reduce, reuse. I think we're still doing that around my household over here. Reading, writing, arithmetic. That's the one that used to always get thrown out at me. For Arkansas, the entire offseason, it's been pretty simple, right? Retention, retention, retention. That's what it's all been about. We've talked about it a ton. Cal's talked about it a ton. The folks who are excited about Arkansas's potential this year have talked about it a ton. And as we know, Arkansas returns about 42% of its scoring from last season. It's very good. They also returned 47.6% of their minutes from last year. Cal says 45, and that's about right. But it's the few that Jaden Carletwa and Aiden Kelly, who's now been added back to the roster, accounted for. It bumps that up a little bit higher, 47.6. Regardless if it's 45 or that leads the SEC. Right now, we've heard John Calipari talk about just the number of teams last year that returned like 90% of their production back, and just how it's completely different going into this year. And that's very, very true. Excuse me. Read another really good story from Isaac Trotter. He does great work over at CBS Sports. I'd highly encourage you to follow him. When he puts out a story, I read, because he really gets into the weeds, digs in, does a ton of research. So definitely want to give him credit for what I thought was a really cool story over at, again, CBSSports.com that really provided, I just thought, a lot of context into the changing landscape that we're dealing with here. So according to his research, in 2020, there were 32 teams. Just 5 years ago, there were 32 teams in the high major ranks alone, not just across all 365 Division I squads, just the high major ranks, that returned 50% or more of their minutes from the previous season. So fast forward 5 years, heading into this upcoming season, and this is the group that is ahead of Arkansas, 47.6, right? But there are only 7 teams that project to have back more than 50% of their minutes. That's crazy. From 32 to 7 in 5 years. And there's quite a bit of turnover again from last year, this year. You think about it with Arkansas leading the way with 45% back. Think about what Tennessee had back last year, and Auburn and Florida, all these other schools out there, Alabama. It was crazy. And there's a lot of newness there with the Razorbacks, and it's kind of flipped the script a little bit there. Purdue at over 70%, they're leading the way. And that's why a lot of people have them kind of pegged as a national title type of favorite. Braden Smith, Fletcher Loyer, Trey Kaufman-Wren, all going to be back. Then it's UConn, Marquette, Stanford, Notre Dame, Iowa State, and SMU. What an eclectic list, man. I think this list is a great illustration of how all retention is not created equal, right? Because if you stunk last year, you might want and need the turnover. I think this is a conversation that we ran into some with football during the offseason, right? Because you could look at it one of two ways. You could be like, damn, they've had 36 guys or whatever enter the transfer portal. This is crazy. There's going to be no retention. But if you really look at who left, and they had some guys who dipped out on them that they would have loved to have back. But I don't know that you were shedding a whole bunch of tears about that. And that was something that, we were talking about it in the moment. A lot of people were like, okay, so a bunch of guys leaving off a 6-6 team. So like, Notre Dame, for example, or like whoever on that list, you got a bunch of people coming back from that. You're like, oh, great. We're returning a bunch of mid, you know what I mean? Whereas, hey, with, UConn and Purdue and some of these others who are really good, might have a little bit different energy there. So, we're obviously high on Arkansas's returning pieces because of, their contributions to the Sweet 16 run and the upside of guys like Carter and Billy heading into year 2. I'm sure Purdue and UConn and Iowa State are thrilled with what they have coming back. But, as for Stanford or Notre Dame or SMU, I'm sure they're not too upset about it. But I don't think returning more than half of a very average or bad team is the foundation of really high expectations. For Arkansas, the returners are the foundation of the high expectations. For these other schools, it's like, all right, cool, we got some dudes back, right? Like we have a core, but we probably need to upgrade with our additions. Probably how they feel. But as Isaac Trotter pointed out in his story, and again, tremendous work on his part, while the who is obviously important with who's coming back, who, am I an owl again? So is the where. I think that's very key here. And so this dude did some nasty work over on KenPom. But of the top 30 teams at KenPom last season, 21 had continuity, returners back at either lead guard or at lead guard and in the paint. Guard and a big. 21 of the 30 top teams at KenPom. 2 years ago, that was true of 24 of the top 30. 3 years ago, it was 23 of the top 30. So there's a pattern here. And so if you look going into next year, there are 21 high major schools that meet this qualification off the bat going into next season. So then you automatically look at those schools and think, okay, they've probably got a pretty good shot to be in the top 30 at KenPom, or they at least meet the standard here for the criteria that we're pulling. We're being selective, but that's okay. Arkansas is one of them, right? DJ Wagner, Trevon Brazile, both running it back. A lead guard, front court piece. And frankly, as I look up and down that list, I think this is one of the better tandems on that list. Not the best, I don't think, but top 5-ish, I think would be fair to say. Other notables that I saw on there, like, UConn is returning Solo Ball and Terrace Reed. That's a really good 1-2 duo, inside out punch. Houston, who we'll see, Milos Uzan's coming back, and JoJo Tugler. That's good. Purdue, Braden Smith and Trey Kaufman-Wren, 2 preseason All-Americans. Yeah, that'll work. Jackson Shelstad, Nate Biddle at Oregon. There's some good combos there, but I think DJ Wagner and Trevon Brazile are certainly up there in that conversation. Now, in the SEC, aside from Arkansas, it was Otega Owe and Brandon Garrison at Kentucky. That's half good. LeBaron Philon and Aiden Sherrill at Bama. That's got potential. It's talented there for sure. Anthony Robinson and Mark Mitchell, probably a little bit underrated, frankly, at Missouri. And then that's it. 4 SEC teams that meet that qualification of a lead guard and a big returning. Isn't that crazy? That's what the transfer portal era has done to you. So we'll see if the pattern holds true for Arkansas next season or not. Time will tell on that, but it is it's actually one of the other returners that I wanted to ask you guys a question about, and we'll get into that in just a moment here. But first, got to tell you about our friends over at Hickey and Hull Law. Divorce and custody cases, they're complex. They really are, and they're way too important to try and face alone. So let Hickey and Hull provide you with the persistent and diligent representation to help guide you through the entire process, a process that they've handled thousands of these cases. Any scenario that's come up, Hickey and Hull Law has dealt with that. The foundation of a strong attorney-client relationship is honesty and trust. Hickey and Hull Law prides themselves on building relationships with their clients by providing honest, principled advice and representation. That's exactly what you need. They push the case forward for their clients, advocating for them in a diligent and consistent manner from start to finish. Hickey and Hull Law has offices all over the state of Arkansas, in Fayetteville, Fort Smith, Little Rock, and Mena. You can call them today at 479-434-2414. Check out their website. Visit hickeyandhull.com or scan the QR code in the top right-hand corner of your screen. It's Hickey and Hull Law. Things are about to get better. Okay. The question that I have for you guys, are Razorback fans overrating or overhyping Karter Knox? Could that be a thing? And before you get your feelings hurt and you crash out in the comments, let's not forget that I'm the one literally a year ago from right as we stand today who predicted that Karter Knox would be the SEC Freshman of the Year. All right. So spare me at least make sure you direct your frustrations appropriately. There is nobody holding down Fort Knox for as long as I have. But I asked the question because I fully believe he's in line for a major jump, a sophomore leap. And I think if you polled Razorback fans, a majority would agree that he should be, Arkansas's best player or their leading scorer, perhaps. I think he's got all SEC written all over him, but I'm not seeing that same energy everywhere. It's kind of a mixed bag of opinions, if I'm being honest, with all the stuff that I've been seeing, ever since he pulled out of the draft. For example, I saw a story a little while back at CBS Sports, and I just gave him a lot of love, I know. But it was 10 college players primed to boost their draft stock. And right away, I see that and I think, okay, Arkansas, SEC program, Sweet 16 a year ago, John Calipari, Carter's going to be on this list for sure. He was not. Out of the 10, there were 5 SEC guys on the list. Karter Knox wasn't one of them. Interesting. I saw Mike Rutherford. He did a story about 10 guys prime for in college basketball, prime for a sophomore leap. No Karter Knox mentioned. The Locked On, their national college basketball podcast, they did a breakout sophomores episode, and they were very specific with their criteria going into it. It was guys who averaged less than 10 points per game as freshmen last year in the SEC. So what that did is it ruled out guys like LeBaron Philon and Zahad Pettiford, who would, admittedly be kind of the low-hanging fruit there. But they wound up going with Darion Reed, who was at Alabama, hurt, kind of a role guy, and then is now at Oklahoma. Okay. He might be in line for a sophomore, but I don't know if that would have been my top candidate. You know who mine is. They mentioned Jaleel Bethea, who was at Miami and is transferring over to Alabama now, but not the guy who is returning to his team, not learning new surroundings, not transferred, didn't need a change of scenery. Now, they briefly mentioned both Karter and Billy. It's just like kind of a couple guys in honorable mention territory there. So they didn't outright ignore him, but I would almost put Karter in a different category than Billy as it pertains to a projected leap. And I don't know about you guys, but Karter Knox screams alpha to me, the guy with Billy. And I love me some Billy Richmond. I think it's more about becoming a guy on a more consistent basis with the team. So, I've listened to a few other just different national podcasts this summer where they, in situations where I would hear like, oh, I know what they're talking about. They're definitely going to be Karter Knox is going to get a shout out. And then he doesn't, or, they just come across a little bit lukewarm. And I just wonder, are some of these folks asleep, or are we a little bit too woke on our man here? Because like I said, to me, it feels like a no-brainer. It's just not across the board. Like I said, it's kind of mixed reviews. For example, and it's not everybody. Like he's getting some love. Okay, so John Rothstein, for example, he didn't have Karter Knox on his preseason All-SEC team that he just put out, but he did have him on a list of potential breakout guys. All right, I guess that's fair. I'm not mad about that one. Jonathan Gavoni, his mock draft came out and he has Karter, second round projection, like right there in that Adu Thero range. It's like, I don't know, maybe feels a little bit low. But then on the flip side, you got a guy like Jonathan Wasserman, another really good draft analyst over at Bleacher Report, that had him all the way up at 16th, like pushing lottery. That's what I'm talking about, man. I just thought he was going to have a little bit more pop and a little bit more buzz than what I've seen so far. In some places he gets it, but in a lot, it's just like, oh, yeah, This kind of reminds me of an episode of the Pod at the Palace that we did a little bit earlier in the summer. I think it was titled something along the lines of, sophomore jumps expected but not guaranteed for the Razorbacks. Because, there's a popular belief out there, and there's plenty of truth to this, that players see the most growth in their games from year 1 to year 2. But there's also something to the thought process of guys who have sophomore slumps. Like, it does happen. I think Devo Davis would be a really good example of the latter there. Came on so strong in the second half of his freshman season. Got a little bit of NBA buzz even going after that tournament run. And then he wound up being a less effective player in year 2. Then had the bounce back as a junior. Jalen Williams would be, Jay Will, I think he would be kind of the opposite, to where, he really saw the vision as a freshman. He was starting over Connor Vanover by tournament time, and then he really took off by his sophomore season. Really took off. The middle ground there would probably be like a DJ Wagner, honestly, who he had very similar production. Like, if you just look at the raw numbers from year 1 to year 2, although I think we'd all agree that DJ was a better basketball player last season at Arkansas than he was 2 years ago at Kentucky, in my opinion. So again, like Karter being really, really good this coming season feels like a slam dunk to me, and probably most of you. I'm of the opinion that even if he just remains kind of the exact same player by way of his skill set that he was at the end of last season, he's going to be much more impactful just by nature of the usage increase that he's almost certainly going to have with this roster. Because, like, if you go over to KenPom, Karter Knox was in the role player category last year for the Razorbacks. He was used on 16.6% of possessions and took 16.9% of the shots. I promise you that both of those figures are going to go up into the 20s next year. And, I think we all saw the arc with him. He shot 40% plus from 3 after February 1st, scored double figures in 9 of his last 12. He had 15 on St. John's and 20 on Texas Tech in the NCAA tournament. There, that needle is pointing up. And and remember the Torvik projections even that we talked about yesterday, which are flawed, but for Karter, he was one of the guys where we're like, they might have kind of nailed it here. 14 points per game with a sturdy offensive rating and heavy minutes. Sure. The other thing about it is if you're going to take on a greater role and be more of a focal point, you're going to be higher on the scouting reports, right, for the opposing teams. But it's not like he's got to do this alone. It's certainly not a one-man band, on this roster. Like, Darius Acuff is going to draw attention. So is Malik Thomas. So is Trevon Brazile. So is Malik Ewan, and so on and so forth. Arkansas's got a lot of talent. They got a lot of guys. I guess I think, again, like part of what surprises me just a little bit about the lack of consistent buzz there is also that this is a John Calipari legacy player too. He's already sent his brother lottery. So to answer our question out there, or, Razorback fans, are we overhyping or, overvaluing Karter Knox? No, I don't think we are. I think it's far more likely that some others need to just get caught up a little bit on our guy. But let me pose an alternate question just for the hell of it. Why not? What if Karter is better, but he doesn't take that massive leap by way of checking NBA draft boxes? Like what if he becomes a consistent double-digit scorer, still 35% three-point shooter on better volume, grows defensively as more of a lockdown wing, but that draft stock doesn't take the huge leap. Like, what if he does wind up in that same area that Gavoni has him at? You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of late first, early second versus where Wasserman has him at, which is like right outside the lottery. Because he would have been probably mid-second round or so last year, especially with the guys who dropped out. He would have gotten drafted, but not where he wanted to be. But what if that's where he wound up, like in that Adu Thero range? Because one thing to consider is the 2026 draft, the draft that's going to happen a year from now, pretty strong. It's AJ Debonsa, Cam Boozer, Darren Peterson, so on and so forth. And then with all the guys who would have been drafted in that 25 to 40-ish range last year, who have another year under their belt with an opportunity up their stock. Guys like Yaxel Lindenborg, Todd Pettiford, Alex Condon from Florida, all those guys like that who wound up opting to come back to school. But the flip side, the 2027 draft 2 years from now is shaping up to be historically weak. And we've talked about it already, but NBA scouts they're already stressing because of the lack of difference makers and the lack of depth in their projections for that 2027 draft class 2 years from now. So there's a legit case to be made that a late first round pick, an early second round pick a year from now is truly a top 20 or potential lottery pick in 2 years. Just saying. And a second round guy could easily sneak into the 20s and get a strong guaranteed deal. Guys who bet on themselves this year of, hey, I can come back and make a bunch of money in college and then up my stock for next year. They're all going to be in that same situation next year, but even more so on steroids almost because of the difference in the draft classes. It's going to be really interesting to see. It's going to be something that we're talking about for sure. Well, I shouldn't say that, because if you ask me how I really feel about how this is all going to play out, we'll never know about this last hypothetical here, because I'm expecting Karter Knox to ball out and be a first round pick in next year's NBA draft. That's just what I think he's going to do. Very, very bullish on him. But if he still winds up in that range right there, like where Thero was last year, or even a little bit higher, we're going to have to look at it and go, damn, are they going to make this man an offer he can't refuse? Because boy, he really could be the same exact player in a year 3 and go significantly higher. It's interesting. Like I said, I think he's going to ball out. I think he's going to be a first round pick next year. If there are some out there that aren't sipping the Kool-Aid that I am right now on Karter Knox, that's okay. I'll be happy to pour you a glass whenever you wake up and get thirsty. It's just a matter of time before everybody catches on. But I was a little bit surprised that there's not a little bit more buzz than maybe I anticipated. But anyway, going to get out of here for the day. Appreciate everybody for tuning in as always. Again, TBD on the Pod at the Palace this weekend. Definitely not going to have a show on Saturday. Going to be out of pocket, depending on when we get all that stuff done and what's going on. We'll see about Sunday. But thanks as always for rocking with us. Subscribe to the Inside Arkansas YouTube channel if you haven't done so already, and also find us wherever you find your podcasts in audio format. The Pod at the Palace is there: Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever. But I'm out of here until I see you again. You guys have a good weekend. Appreciate you. We'll catch you next time.